probably met in a fishing boat out in western Alaska, and I've accused him. I've said I've had the scars to prove it, and he says, no, that wasn't him who got a fish hook and who cast the fish hook and caught me. It was somebody else. But I've known Sean O'Keefe for many years, and I'm honored to welcome him back to Alaska. Sean O'Keefe was then a staffer on the Senate Appropriations Committee overseeing military expenditures for the United States. He went on to be the Secretary of the Navy, went on to be Controller of the Pentagon, went on to be the Deputy Director of OMB, and went on to be the Chief of NASA. And Sean, this is your first trip back since that very fateful night in 2010 when we lost Senators Ted Stevens and Bill Phillips and many others close to us who had worked Arctic issues for years. And Catherine Stevens, we're honored to have you here with us today. And we do our best every day to keep your husband's legacy alive and the ideas that he shared with all of us for the Arctic to keep them going. And thank you for joining us and continuing to connect this group to the world. Sean, I just wanted to say that we're going to change slightly. You heard two dramatic ideas about infrastructure funding from the first panelist this morning. And we've asked Sean, because of his background in military finance, his background in overseeing all the finances of the United States, his background in public, private, and international partnerships at NASA, to bring a team together to take a look at the thorny question that we've had in Alaska for quite some time and in the Arctic quite some time, which is how do we fund the icebreaker infrastructure that we need? And the other members of his team who are here are David Van Slyke, who's Associate Dean and Chair at Syracuse University, Zachary Hoytink, who is a PhD student at Syracuse University, and Sean not only is a distinguished senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, but also leads a program at the Maxwell School, which makes sure that anybody going on to senior leadership positions in our military has a good chance to have the benefit of a very good team of knowledge. Sean, it's an honor to have you back here in Alaska.
Well, thank you, Meade. His blithe reference to our prior experiences on board fishing excursions here in Alaska was, I hate to remind you of this, Meade, it was the better part of about 35 years ago. I mean, talk about hold a grudge. I mean, this is really serious. But I am really, really pleased to be back. This is, as he suggested, my first opportunity to come back to Alaska in 5 years. And so this is a real treat and experience to be part of an important topic like this. My congrats to you, Meade, and to Alice for putting together this extraordinary conference. I think this means an awful lot to obviously the community more broadly, but also a reach that I think is significant for the nation. I'm really, really impressed, President Grimson, that you would take the time to be part of this opportunity, and one that really the benefit of your thoughts I heard yesterday were really quite extraordinary, and there were many who have relayed to me, I think, the important contributions that you made then and continue to make with great regularity on this important set of issues on the Arctic. And to Admiral Papp, my good friend, it's really terrific to see you. He was a real stalwart leader for the Coast Guard, of course, but particularly during a time when it mattered to me most. And I am grateful to you, sir, for the effort that you exerted on the very difficult and challenging time that 5 years ago, as the Coast Guard and the Air National Guard really teamed up to do an extraordinary effort for search and rescue that really made the difference of why I'm even here. So I thank you for that and for the tremendous organization you led, sir. Thank you. And Catherine, it is always, always a delight to see you. Thank you so much for being here, and it's a great opportunity, I think, that she always makes to stay in touch with the events here in the state and important issues that were important to Ted Stevens. And I've got to tell you, since my very first trip to Alaska some 35 years ago, it was not long thereafter that Meade had this incident that he can't seem to forget, that I first learned from him firsthand exactly what the strategic significance of the state of Alaska is. Now, at every trip thereafter, in which I was up here for the next 30 years, every year, at least once over that time, I listened to that speech endlessly. I mean, it was a constant refrain that he always pitched anywhere he went, to any occasion, to any collection of three or more on a street corner, of the strategic importance of the state of Alaska. This was his repeat and unrelenting refrain at every opportunity and every occasion. And it was not restricted just to here. So he wasn't telling the community what they wanted to hear. This was something he carried with him with even more verve, as only Ted Stevens is capable of doing, of course, in the halls of Congress, in every administrative leader I ever knew in Washington, D.C., and every occasion globally in any opportunity to really constantly drive home that absolute imperative of what makes this part of the world a strategically important location, and to this nation, a critically important one. So this has been ingrained in me since the very beginning of my professional career, and one that I've never even dismissed for a moment, with the secure knowledge that his hand would still be on my shoulder, reminding me why this is such an important set of events. He was a passionate, tireless advocate for this state. There is no question. But one that was for all about the right national reasons as well. And I think this is clearly part of this conference and a discussion about it that I think highlights the significance of that particular question as well, and why this is a national imperative in so many different ways. I think Ted Stevens would be extremely pleased by the opportunity to hear and see this kind of conference underway to accent this dimension of that strategic importance. And it is timely. It's an important turning point of the debate and discussion now about how so many of these factors will converge. And so part of what I've done here with my great colleague David Van Slyke, Trevor Brown, who is the dean at The Ohio State University, and Zach Hoytnick, in putting together this kind of an analysis of the issues of partnerships fulfilling Arctic responsibilities, is an effort to really delve into why that imperative is there. And much of this that you're going to hear, I think, is a summary of much of what I understand was discussed in greater depth yesterday, certainly alluded to this morning in terms of some of the financing alternatives for much of the infrastructure in the state, but it also will put a specific emphasis on where those higher priorities reside. Again, this is repeating what, again, has already been really ingrained in the way I think Alaskans view the U.S. interests, the Alaskan interests in the Arctic, but also the broader set of questions of why this is important more nationally. And it is a very, very dominant piece of what is now the President's national security strategy, which is not particularly new in this regard, but it is a higher accent. It is one that I think the President's strategy now really puts a tremendous, very, very clear, unambiguous commentary on protecting and promoting the U.S. interest in the matter of national security, which is a higher dimension than I think has ever been seen as clearly as that in the national security strategy documentation. And I think that speaks volumes about current events, the trends that we see, as well as, I guess, as I understand it, his interest to be here next week, as I gather it, to be part of the occasion, really to focus focus on the importance of the Arctic as well. The U.S. interest in the Arctic, and again, it is articulated very clearly in the National Security Strategy documentation of its sovereign. It's a matter of sovereignty. It's an important dimension of exactly who we are as Americans and why the right of free passage is a critical dimension of what we're about and our origin and history. It is strategic in the context of its location, again, the Ted Stevens refrain, and its economic and commercial value. There's no doubt this is a critically important element there. But it also stresses, as also mentioned and referenced this morning, I think the environmental and scientific objectives that need to be examined as you go forward. Let's see, got that right. The strategy itself emphasizes three challenges relevant to the Arctic that are really quite critical. The first one is the access to shared space. This is a direct thought and derivative from law of the sea doctrine that has been part of the fabric of U.S. commercial reach and economic might for the better part of 200 years. The very idea that we would have free access and ability to traverse the sea lanes of the globe is a good piece of what ultimately led to this period we've seen, certainly in the last 100+ years, of U.S. preeminence in terms of the ability to have a global expanse and a foreign policy that takes that into dominant consideration. So it is the notion of a shared access to space is part of the objective that has been embodied in that theme since the founding of the Republic and is now even more dominant given the fact that that access in the Arctic is that much more evident. The second feature, though, that is emphasized in the strategy, and again, this was published just back in April of this year, emphasizes the energy security objectives and the imperative, again, for this continuing move that we have seen over the course of time as a consequence, largely, not a policy, but because of technology and access to alternative energy sources, the means to actually support ourselves, which has always been a critical objective, always been a statement of policy by every national politician who has ever run for president. But it is now upon us as an opportunity and as a condition, and as a result, that energy security, this becomes an imperative in that context as well. And then, of course, as part of the president's policy overall, the emphasis on climate change and the focus on what are the consequences as a result of the environmental conditions is a big piece of what has driven, for whatever set of reasons, a dominant view that says this is now much more accessible means and capacity around the globe than what we had ever seen before, and that draws the attention as a consequence of this particular dimension. So the issue is not as much a referendum on the question of what has led to this condition from a scientific standpoint as much as a reality and an acceptance that it's happened. So independent of exactly how it derived, set all the political argument to one side or the other, this is a condition that is present upon us. And as a result, nowhere have I ever seen are folks more aware of how the adjustments across the globe have come to affect the geology as well as the topography of an area as much as Alaskans are. You see it all the time and at regular intervals. From the economic imperatives, again, part of what the strategy emphasizes heavily, again, is 30% of the world's undiscovered natural gas, a statistic that I think every Alaskan could recite on cue. 13% of the world's undiscovered oil, another statistic as well, it's always used, and $1 trillion in minerals. There's been as a consequence of all this, and again, as a result of that improvement in access, is a significant increase of over 100% in maritime transit over the course just of the last 6 years. So, I mean, if there was ever any evidence of the ability of free access to sea lanes of navigation across the globe, this is becoming a more dominant question in that regard. and 1 million tons of cargo shipped. There is no question that the challenges that go along with these kind of economic models for the purpose of delivery of assets always inevitably will be the driving stone, which says this obviously has become a much more economically feasible approach to it, which is why the cargo shipments have gone up. No question. And the U.S. Arctic policy, I think in particular as it pertains to this dimension of the comprehensive national security policy towards the Arctic, is on 3 lines of efforts. Again, advancing U.S. security interests. A statement to the effect this is an imperative we ought to view as a national objective. To pursue responsible Arctic regional stewardship, the notion is to do so on a collaborative basis, primarily with the Canadians and other nation states that have sovereign nations that have a very strong interest, certainly in the Arctic, Iceland being among the most dominant in terms of thought leadership in this regard as well, and to promote the international cooperation that would really key to this.